Okay, today finally, y'all, we begin to end Reconstruction. Yay, part 4. Hopefully today and tomorrow I can get this done. Although today I'm really only going to go through about 4 or 5 slides, but they're really, really important ones. I'm going to try to teach you guys some skills of how to analyze cartoons. One of the cartoons we're looking at today will be on your DBQ. You'll be doing Monday or Tuesday. And so really, really pay good attention to this. I know you're going to be doing a lot of typing and writing, and I apologize for that to do this, but this is so, so important. And it really shows you what your knowledge, but also your skills and your deep thinking can do to help you understand it. Now, we're going to look today at and tomorrow at the election and service of General Grant. I'm going to talk about him for a while. He becomes our president after Andrew Johnson finishes his presidency. Now, I mentioned yesterday that Johnson was impeached, but by a single vote failed to be removed from office. Now, some people chalk that up to the heroism of Edmund Ross. Like I said, some people go with that. Other people believe that basically a deal was made where Andrew Johnson basically kind of stayed quiet. He kept to himself. He didn't veto any more bills. And they basically said, look, dude, we'll let you stay president for a whole nother year. Just don't get in our way. But of course, the damage had been done to the executive branch, to the presidency. No strong president would be in power for some time. General Grant, I have tremendous respect for as a general. I have respect for what happened to him in later life. General Grant, y'all, was a victim of what is known as a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is where you invest your money with a person. That person swears they're investing money for you, and they send you returns off of their great investments. Man, dude, you made 10% last month. I doubled your money this year. It is so awesome. Well, what they're really doing, y'all, is they are stealing your money that you gave them. They're not really investing it in anything. So how are they getting you money? Well, when they get a new investor who, say, chips in, I don't know, $500,000, they're sending you parts of that person's money because they've already ripped off your money. But now they are sending money to you from that other person. Now, the only way a Ponzi scheme can keep going is to get new and new investors. When the investors stop or when investors learn of the Ponzi scheme and they demand their money back, it all falls down like a house of cards. General Grant got caught up in that. Now, how had Grant made his money? Well, General Grant, y'all, was given all kinds of money by people. People just kind of felt like, General Grant, you saved our country. Here's a house. And I'm not kidding you. Like when he went to some city, I think it was Chicago, they're like, General Grant, you're awesome. Here's a house. And he just kind of took it all as sort of his due. So it wasn't really a big surprise when one day, and if I remember the story right, it was raining. General Grant had given a speech. He's walking with the guy under a big umbrella. And the guy says, you know what, General Grant, you ought to run for president. And General Grant, kind of like Forrest Gump, says, yeah, I think so, and that'll be good or something. And I'm not really saying he was dumb, but he was politically ignorant, I think, in a lot of ways. And he just decides, sure, that's the next thing, save the country as a soldier. Now I'll save the country as a president. And so, of course, you need a motto. You need a theme. And so they asked General Grant, hey, what's your motto? What's going to be your theme? And he thought for a while and he goes, let us have peace. Let us have peace. Okay. Now it's simple, but it means a lot. Think about it. The Civil War had been over for 3 years at this point, but in a lot of ways, it still wasn't over in people's hearts and minds. There were still Union troops down in the South, right? There was still violence happening against African Americans. There would be riots. People would kill them. There were some terrible stories of what happened in various cities like New Orleans, Memphis, and other places like that. Men were away from their wives, from their families and things. So for a lot of people, y'all, the war was still going. People wanted it to end. And that really meant Reconstruction ending. Now, the man who ran with him was named Schuyler Colfax, probably one of the most corrupt people ever to run for vice president. There'll be all kinds of scandals during the Grant administration, and Colfax will be implemented in what's known as the Crédit Mobilier scandal, the railroad scandal, which how do we say that in America? The Credit Mobilier scandal. but more about that later. But he literally gave away stocks, y'all, on the floor of the U.S. Senate as vice president, and he had to resign. Now, I don't have a picture here. Later you'll see, but the person running for the Democratic Party, y'all, for president and vice president was a man by the name of Seymour, Semour. Okay, and no, his last name wasn't Butts. That's an old joke. Seymour Butts. Get it? Anyway, his name was Seymour, and the other guy running was Blair, Blair. So you have Seymour and Blair. I guess we could say that I'm glad his name wasn't Butts, because that would have been Seymour Butts. Anyway, bad jokes, but let's go on. So Grant, y'all, and I'll tell you later about the end of his life. It's an interesting, moving story, but because he did get some money back for his family at great cost to himself. But when he died, he is buried in this massive tomb right on the Hudson River. Okay, here you see it. When I go to New York, I pass by. I've never actually been inside to see his tomb. Now, an old joke that I heard as a kid, and it's not very funny, but it's one of those jokes that I'm going to tell you anyway, just so you can tell it to somebody else and keep the pain going. But this is the joke. Okay, you ready? So, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Well, of course, the obvious answer is President Grant or General Grant, to which you respond, no. You say, there's his tomb. You say, Grant and his wife. Get it? Grant and his wife. It's just not Grant on the left. It's on the right, Julia Dent Grant, his wife. Get it?
Yeah, that's a joke, son. Don't you get it?
I don't get it, but anyway, so there you go. There's your joke of the day, and it's not a very good one. All right, now we come to a concept you guys need to know called waving the bloody shirt. This is going to be a technique that is going to be very, very useful for the Republicans during the whole period of these Gilded Age politics. It is basically a strategy where you blame an entire party, an entire section of the country, or whatever for the actions of some of its members. And I don't want to get political, but I do think today we are dangerously close to that kind of thing when we blame an entire party for the actions of people that happened in Washington, D.C. the other day. You can't just say, well, everybody that's Republican must support that, okay? Everybody who voted for President Trump must support that kind of action. I'm sure there are people that do, but it's very dangerous in my personal opinion, but I'm going to ask you guys to write about that. I'm not going to mark it wrong if you disagree with me, but I think there is a danger when you lop everybody together by the actions of some or a few or even a single individual. But that's what waving the bloody shirt did. So how did that story come about? Well, literally, the way I understand it, a former general, former Democrat, now Republican, by the name of Benjamin Butler, was given a speech. Now, in this speech, he wanted people to vote against the Democrats and for his Republican Party. And he had a shirt that apparently had come from a victim of the KKK. This man had been whipped badly and had bled all over the shirt. And so it's sort of like, look here, people. Look what this guy did, Look what the Klan did. Look what the South did. Look what Democrats did. It's sort of a progression from Klan to Southerners to all Democrats, because Southerners were Democrats in those days, right? And so this technique worked, and so people began to use it. Anytime you wanted to hurt Democrats, you waved the bloody shirt and you accused them of things. Now, at its most simple basis, okay, this is how it worked. You said John Wilkes Booth was a Democrat. Well, John Wilkes Booth killed the president. He was an assassin. Therefore, all Democrats were assassins. John Wilkes Booth was a Southerner. He was a Virginian. Therefore, all Virginians, all Democrats, all Southerners are assassins. Now, all the states who seceded, y'all, who left the Union that brought on the Civil War, they were Democrats. Therefore, all Democrats must be secessionists, even if they're Northern Democrats. And therefore, they must all be traitors to this country. Heck, they're all probably assassins, okay? You know, I think in economics we call it, is that a fallacy of composition or something? I can't remember. Logic, y'all, was like the only class I ever made a C in. I'll tell you, it wrecked my average, my GPA in college. I hated my logic professor. He wasn't very logical. Of course, I'm not either, even though I like Spock on Star Trek. But the thing is, y'all, you can't, do that. You can't make that jump. If one person of a party does something, or even a handful of a party does something, or heck, even part of the country does something, that everybody must be bad. Okay. So this technique, waving the bloody shirt, know it. Okay. And be aware of it, be afraid, and point it out, y'all, when it's being used. Okay. So here we come to a cartoon. And I was thinking on the way to school this morning, y'all, because, I do that. Y'all, I'll be honest. I try to think at least once a day, and I highly recommend it for everybody. But anyway, I was thinking this morning about memes. Memes are kind of cool, right? You get a picture from somewhere, you put it on the meme generator, you type your little cute little saying, you put it up on your Instagram, Facebook, whatever you guys use that I don't know about yet. And people are like, oh, yeah, man, awesome. That's clever. I get it. Cool, right? Well, they didn't have that back then, but they could draw. They could engrave. And this is an engraving that was featured in a newspaper. Now, we'll talk more about the cartoonist. We'll talk more about some of the figures involved here. I maybe should have reordered it, but, I didn't, and then I made my notes. I'm like, the heck with it. We'll do it a little bit out of order here. But this is an amazing cartoon. There is so much going on here, y'all. You could almost teach all of Reconstruction. You could even teach part of the Civil War with this cartoon. And that's exactly what Mr. D is going to do right now with you guys. Some of this you will know. Some of it you should have known had we not had Corona, and I would have been teaching this. Some of it you're not expected to know. People at the time would have known, and Mr. D only knows because, he studies this stuff for a living. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to torture this cartoon, y'all. We're going to squeeze it for everything I can get out of it. It took me about 45 minutes to an hour, y'all, to cut this picture up, to put this slide together. So pretend to enjoy and appreciate it as we do so. All right, so you see it here. You got your big picture. And the way I always recommend for going after pictures like this, y'all, is you break them up. You zoom in. Now, most likely, you guys will be doing this online. When you do these kind of things, you'll be taking the test, and you may have to get up really, really close. Or when I was doing this with my first period students this morning, y'all, I saw them put their screens right in their faces. Okay. If you print it out, and I always suggest printing stuff out, that's a little easier done. Get the picture. Oh, okay, Mr. Day. I'll say what you're saying there. You do what you got to do, right? But I'm going to do that for you. All right, so let's go through and let's start looking at this picture, y'all. So once again, the cartoonist, Thomas Nast. It's like nasty, but without the Y, okay? He's a German immigrant who came here and became probably America's greatest cartoonist of the late 19th century. He worked for something called Harper's Weekly, and we'll talk a lot more about him. Now, the irony is, but hey, what else is new? Irony, right? He was a German immigrant, but he had a lot of contempt for Irish immigrants, poor immigrants. He saw them as very pliable, not very smart, and easily bought off by people. And maybe there was a little bit to that by the actions of them. But at the same time, before I judge those Irish immigrants, and of course my family, Irish immigrants way back in the day, right? We'll have to ask why this happened, why they were so easily bought off, okay? Because there's a story on their side too. There's always two stories, y'all remember that. Anyway, so let's go through and start looking at it. So we got three figures here, and standing that is, and as you'll see, another figure on the ground, and that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that. Now, the title of this is a white man's government. They are wanting to make it clear that white men are in control, and blacks who think they might be, sorry, you're not. You are literally under our feet. You're under the ground. Now, the words at the bottom, which you can see on your original, but not on this one, say, we, meaning these three men, we regard the Reconstruction Act's so-called, right, air quotes, of Congress as usurpations. They're trying to take power from us, unconstitutional, revolutionary, and void. Remember void? They are trying to nullify the Reconstruction Act, y'all. This goes back to secession. This goes back to John C. Calhoun. This goes back to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts. So you got a lot going on here, man, y'all. Like I said, you can teach a whole class almost on this, okay? So let's go through it. So Thomas Nast, this is a white man's government. The date, 1868. Just 3 years after the Civil War, y'all. It is still fresh in people's minds. All right, here's the first figure. This is an Irish immigrant, okay? How do I know that? Well, first of all, most of the people who were coming in were Irish at the time, settling in New York. But if you know Thomas Nast, and I didn't know him personally, but anyway, if you know him, the way he always portrayed Irish people, y'all, and this is harmful, this is hurtful to Mr. D, but I'm a big boy, got my big boy pants on. He portrayed them as simian. He portrayed them as apes, as monkey. This is an Irishman, as Thomas Nast and as a lot of the American people saw them, as basically as brutes. Look at that, the teeth, the nose, the eyes. This is an ape, except it's Irish people. But another way that I know it's Irish is 5 points. 5 points. The 5 points, y'all, were a spot of New York where 5 roads came together. There is where the Irish lived. It was like what we today would call an Irish ghetto. They lived in a terrible, terrible conditions, and they formed gangs. There were lots of Irish gangs. One of the movies you guys would have seen more of was called The Gangs of New York. I will show you a clip from it, but it's an awesome movie. I recommend taking an afternoon off and watching it and seeing about the play of gangs and stuff. And it also features incidents that are in the background. Now, this is for a New York audience. Not all Americans would have known this, but a lot of your more educated ones would have. But if you were a New York citizen, you knew this stuff. Notice here, y'all, it's also a cross. Now, crosses were mainly displayed by Catholic people. Now, that doesn't mean Christians didn't wear crosses, but he's once again emphasizing this is Irish, Irish Catholic, in case you're getting confused with those other Northern Irish people who aren't Catholic, right? So he makes that clear on there as well, too. Now, in the hands of this Irish brute is a club. What does the club say? A vote. Because each of these immigrants, y'all, got the right to vote. And they sold their votes, in Thomas Nast's opinion, to the highest bidder. Well, to the only bidder, basically, who are going to be the political bosses. We'll talk about Tammany Hall. We'll talk about Boss Tweed coming up tomorrow, okay? So they sold their votes to the people who would buy those votes. So they're wielding a club. Their club is the vote. All they represent, y'all, basically is this brute force of the power of the ballot. Now, to the Irish, y'all, they didn't have much. They came here, they got off the boats. They probably had spent their last dime or whatever pence to get here. And so they would be met at the boat by wealthy people who were Democratic supporters. These Democratic supporters would get them a place to live. They would get them a job, not much of a job, but it was a job. They would get them basic medical care when they needed it. And heck, on Christmas, on Thanksgiving, they might come by with a turkey. When your daughter got married, they might give her a gift. Now, they didn't do that just because of the decency of their hearts. No, these were people who controlled, they were people running for office. They were people who wanted to control the people who ran and won the office. They were political bosses, word bosses. And what they did, y'all, was they said, I'm going to give you all this stuff, but a few times a year, you're going to have to do something for me. You're going to vote the way I tell you. Now, it's not like today where you vote secretly and nobody knows if you voted for Biden or for Trump or, hey, whoever, right? You voted publicly. Ballots were often marked by color. You marked them in public. So they watched. Oh, hey, that dude there, he didn't vote the way we wanted. Get rid of him. Get him out of his house. Get rid of his job. So you voted the way they told you. And these Irish, y'all, they hadn't been able to vote overseas. And I can't say that if I came to this country poor without anything and somebody gave me stuff and said, hey, I'm going to give you this stuff, but I'm going to ask you to do something you couldn't even do in your own country. I'm going to ask you to vote my way. I would do it. And I probably would. So I'm not going to blame my peeps who probably did that. Okay. Now, in the middle here, we see a man. Now, I asked my students in first period who this was. Some thought he might be a farmer or whatever, and I could see that possibly. But if you look at him in more detail, you can figure out this isn't a farmer. We'll zoom in a little bit here, but you can see here he's got a gun right here, right? He's also got buttons suggestive of maybe a uniform, okay? He's got a knife here. He's got boots, maybe like a soldier might wear, a cavalryman perhaps, or something like that. And notice too, y'all, they all have their hands together. When do you do that? Well, you guys have seen teams. You put your hands together like, rah, 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 we're going to beat them. Yay, yay. You know, and then you go off and you do your whatever, right? So it's sort of like a cheer right before you go off to a game, or maybe you're celebrating. You're coming together, these three forces. Okay, so let's look at this guy in some more detail. Oh, who's this guy? This is Nathan Bedford Forrest, y'all, the famous Confederate cavalry officer in the Civil War. Now, his Civil War exploits, I will give him, are heroic. It's amazing when you read what this man accomplished as a Civil War soldier for the South. But then he also became what? The first leader of the KKK. He was an imperial wizard or grand wizard or whatever term they used at the time, right? Grand Cyclops. They had all kinds of names. But anyway, he was the leader of that. Now, people at the time might have been able to recognize the face. The beard is very synonymous with Nathan Forrest. Almost all Confederate generals, y'all, for whatever reason, seem to have massive beards. In fact, I had a student one year, we were watching some excerpts, and they're like, Mr. D, was it a requirement to have a beard if you were a Confederate general? I'm like, well, it seems to be. And hey, look, there's a bird coming out of that guy's beard, you know? It was weird, right? It was just really weird, y'all. But yeah, they seem to have it. I don't know if that's gray or he just didn't clean up after that last meal. But so this guy, y'all, Confederate soldier then, Grand Cyclops now, okay, or leader of the KKK. Now, some other things about him. He's holding in his hand a dagger. The dagger says the lost cause. Remember, y'all, the lost cause was this idea that the South hadn't really lost the Civil War. It had been kind of stolen from them by traitors like Longstreet, who were scalawags now supporting openly the Republican Party. They probably supported then secretly, right? The lost cause was about the South will rise again, okay? And I think personally, people at the time associated a Southerner holding a dagger, a knife like that, y'all, with another figure, John Wilkes Booth. Because John Wilkes Booth, after he assassinated Lincoln and jumped to the stage, he allegedly held up his knife and said, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus ever to tyrants. The same thing supposedly about Julius Caesar. Brutus killed Julius Caesar because Caesar was a threat, right, to the Roman Republic, and so he was killing a tyrant to save the Republic. I love Caesar, but I love Rome more. That's all the things that Brutus supposedly did or thought about. So John Wilkes Booth, the actor, is like, this is what happens to tyrants. Lincoln's a tyrant, so I just killed him. But Lincoln also supposedly said the South will rise again. So I think a viewer at the time, y'all, would have associated not only Nathan Bedford Forrest with this guy, but also with the lost cause. Now, how do I know he's a Confederate? If I look at his belt buckle, y'all, it says CSA, Confederate States of America, and people would have known that then. So this is a Confederate soldier, now a Klansman, right? Maybe a supporter of John Wilkes Booth, right? There you go. Now, this was something, and I'll be honest, y'all, I only got this last period. I looked at it with my first period. I'm like, y'all, that's a medal. It's a medal, and it says something, Fort Pill, and it's got like a skull on it, right? what do y'all think it is? And they couldn't answer, and I couldn't answer. So I was talking to some of my colleagues, and I was showing them what I'd done with the slide, because Mr. D's kind of proud of this, because this took a lot of work to do. And so I'm looking at it, and then boom, it finally came to me, y'all. Fort Pillow. So what is Fort Pillow? Well, during the Civil War, Nathan Bedford Forrest captured captured Union troops at a battle called Fort Pillow. But what was bad was the men surrendered. Well, when the men surrendered at Fort Pillow, the Union soldiers, many of whom were black, either Nathan Bedford Forrest, as was believed at the time, directly ordered, or he just let happen, as some people have tried to say now to excuse the behavior. There's no excusing what happened, in my opinion. But anyway, African-American soldiers were massacred after their surrender at Fort Pillow. Now, when the North announced that it was going to have black soldiers, or when it was found out, Southerners had threatened to kill them, to which Lincoln said, if you kill black soldiers that you capture, we will start killing Confederate soldiers that we capture. Well, fortunately, that didn't happen, but except at Fort Pillow. So this is, once again, y'all, proof of this is not just Nathan Bedford Forrest, but this is Confederates. They are killing brave black soldiers fighting for this country. What could be more treasonous than that? Not just fighting a civil war for independence, but actually killing people who have surrendered, who are fighting for the other cause, right? So that Fort Pillow is hard to see. And I don't know if you guys would see it on paper, but man, this is what you got to do. Now, this is obviously a wealthy man. You can tell by his clothes, right? He's wearing a nice tuxedo, nice suit. He's better dressed than anybody. He's got dress shoes, not muddy shoes like this guy. He's got like this gold bob for his watch. And I didn't zoom in on it here, but when you look at his button says Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue is like the richest part of New York, or it definitely was at the time. It's where all the fancy stores and stuff are. So this guy is Mr. Fifth Avenue. He is rich. He is Rick James rich, okay? And then if you look up close, y'all, he's got a wallet. You know, he's got a wallet in his hand, and it is, I mean, it is so thick, y'all. It is the opposite of Mr. D's wallet, which is usually pretty empty, except for bills. It's got like money sticking out the sides. You got money all sticking out here. And if you zoom in on that wallet, let's zoom in on that wallet. What do we see? Capital. Capital means money. Capital means machinery. But notice it says here capital for votes. This guy is literally buying votes with his money. And he's getting people like that Irish immigrant to vote the way he wants. He's getting Southerners like Nathan Bedford Forrest and all the people he represents to vote the way he wants with money. And we'll talk about later why. Why is it such a big deal to get people to vote for people you want? What does that mean for you? Well, it's a way to get rich during the time. Remember the era of good stealings? These people are going to get rich off of government contracts. And how do you get those government contracts? You get in power, and then you pick who gets the contracts. And then, of course, you make money off the contracts by giving contracts to your buddies who kick money back or who bribe you to get the contracts. So there's money to be made there, and you can see some of that money sticking out right there. You also can see what looks like it's a nice, what do you call it? Oh, you know, they have on their arms there. Cufflink. Yeah, cufflink. There you go, which normal people don't wear. Then you come to the prone figure, the figure on the ground, y'all. And I've looked at this figure, and I've tried to figure out, no pun intended, what's going on here. Is the man alive? Is he dead? I don't know what you guys think. To me, he looks a lot. He still looks alive. And, you know, he has definitely been weakened here. They are literally, if you look at this, y'all, the Irishman's foot is on him. The Confederate guy's foot is on him. The rich guy's foot is on him. His cap has been knocked off. Now, if you remember, African-American soldiers were allowed to serve after the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln gave them a lot of the credit for winning the Civil War because they were like this fresh injection of soldiers. Obviously, nobody was fighting harder than they were because they were fighting for the freedom of people like themselves. not just for the union of this country, but for their own freedom and freedom maybe of people back home and stuff. And they fought heroically, particularly at a battle called the Battle of Fort Wagner. Now, once again, I know I'm recommending movies to you guys. You ever get a chance, sit down for 2 hours and watch a movie called Glory. It's one of Mr. D's favorite movies. I have like 25 movies in my top 10 list, and it's one of them, y'all. It is beautifully done. And in this movie, a character of course, they didn't have the movie back then, but they knew the real story. And the real story was about Fort Wagner, where African-American soldiers made this attack on this fort, which was never taken, by the way, although they fought gallantly, to get the fort. In 1863, outside of Charleston, South Carolina, where the Civil War had started. And so there was a story which they may or may not know, Nast may or may not know, but Mr. D knows, but there were a lot of stories like this. In the movie, the character is Denzel Washington, and it's a lot more complicated, and it's changed around. But the real story was a man by the name of, I think he was either a sergeant or private, but his last name was Carney, and he won the Congressional Medal of Honor. And when I was in Washington, D.C. at a museum, I actually got to see the real document of Frederick Douglass's son, who was in the same unit, the 54th Massachusetts, his writing about what Carney did at Fort Wagner that day. And what he did is amazing. And seeing that letter, which got Carney the Congressional Medal of Honor, he survived, unlike the Denzel character in the movie, was amazing. He carried the flag. Now, you carry the flag, y'all, during a battle. You're like the first guy they shoot, right? And twice on Sunday. And so he was shot multiple times, but he never let the flag touch the ground. And when the battle was over and they had to retreat, he went back and he was down on a knee. He gets back, he sets the flag, he holds the flag and he gives it to somebody and he says, "The old flag, she never touched the ground." Now, to my generation, to my father's generation who fought in World War II, you never want the American flag to touch the ground. You treat it with respect. In fact, people used to say, the flag touched the ground, you need to burn it respectfully, or when it gets worn and tethered, you burn it respectfully. Now, this part is my own opinion. I don't like seeing the flags burned by people, y'all. I don't like seeing the American flag trashed by anybody around the world, but especially by Americans. I recognize people have that right, and maybe they have a legitimate right to do it. But what I'm saying is, I don't like seeing it. And people back then, that would have been on steroids. To see the American flag that they had just fought a civil war for on the ground. Literally, this guy's foot is almost on it. This man has proudly, like Carney, carried the American flag, but now he is on the ground. His hat with U.S. on it, right, is on the ground. And what do you see? He is reaching out, y'all, for something. And what is he reaching out for? That's a ballot box. People back then would recognize it, and you guys need to recognize that if you see it in other cartoons. That is a ballot box, y'all. And if you notice something, let's go back to the guy. I mean, I almost see tears here. He's fought for this country. He's won, he hopes, the freedom of his people and people like him. His eyes are still working. And what is he looking at? Look over there. Follow the way. He's looking at the ballot box. Look where his hand is. His hand is almost able to reach that ballot box, y'all, but he isn't quite getting there. Maybe if he didn't have these three forces, the wealthy Northerners, right? The political bosses, the old Confederacy and the KKK and people like that, and of course these Irish immigrants, maybe he could reach the ballot box. Maybe he could actually get to vote, but that's not happening. But it got that close. This is Reconstruction, y'all. Almost. What almost happened, but also what kept things from happening. Now I'm going to have to end now. I know it's a somewhat short lesson today. We'll look at the other cartoon tomorrow, which is a lot simpler, and we'll take you through the rest of it. Hopefully wrap this up on Monday, and then you guys can do a DBQ. All right, I'm going to close it right there. You guys have a great day. I'm going to go join my Act Deck team. Hopefully things will go well. All right, take care, y'all. Enjoyed it.